Welcome to the Fibromyalgia podcast. I'm Tammy Stackelhouse, fibromyalgia coach, author, and founder of the International Fibromyalgia Coaching Institute. The goal of this podcast is to empower you with access to the dream team of experts and coaches I've discovered are key to living the fibro life you love. From the comfort of your own home, and maybe even your pajamas, I'll help you take back control of your life and health. To help out with fibro fog, I always include full show notes and additional resources at fibromyalgiapodcast.com. Welcome to the Fibromyalgia podcast. I'm your coach, Tammy Stackelhouse, and this is episode 113. Today's episode is a clip from our July Fibromyalgia Stories of Hope and Healing event, featuring our special guest commencement speaker, Dr. Ginevra Lipton. As Dr. Ginevra talked with our graduates, she shared several tips to help your doctor help you. There are so many good tips in here, I had to share it with you here on the podcast. After her speech, please keep listening. At the end of the episode, I've got several resources you can use for free, like a symptom tracking log and other tools that will make it easier to implement the tips Dr. Ginevra shares here. Just keep listening after her speech, and I'll have the links where you can get those resources for free. All right, let's go ahead and move on to our special guest commencement speaker, Dr. Ginevra Lipton. As a top fibro expert, Dr. Ginevra is a Tufts University School of Medicine graduate, board certified in internal medicine and trained in functional medicine. Dr. Ginevra developed fibromyalgia as a medical student and spent many years using herself as a guinea pig to find successful treatments, which she shares in her books, the Fibro Manual and the Fibro Food Formula, and her line of herbal and magnesium products, Frida Botanicals. If you want some fierce fibro advice, I love that, from a doctor who has personal experience, you can follow Dr. Ginevra on YouTube or at drginevra.com. Welcome. We are so thrilled that you're here with us today.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here, and congrats to all the graduates. I'm so excited that there's 7 people that now can help more people exponentially with fibromyalgia. That's the beautiful part, I think, of coaching and advisors, is that, each one person can help maybe another 10 people who can help another 10 people. So I think that was kind of Tammy's vision when she first started the Coaching Institute, was to really be able to spread more widely that piece of information that you might need to help yourself feel better with fibromyalgia. And I think the topic of my discussion today is I wanted to really focus on ways that we can kind of help our provider to help us. So I have experienced fibromyalgia both as a patient and as a provider. And I think I can speak to some of the challenges on both sides of that interaction. And everybody that's listening to this that has fibromyalgia can completely relate, I'm sure, to the experience of going to the doctor and feeling like you know more about fibromyalgia than they do. And that is a very discouraging feeling, because how are you going to get help from somebody who doesn't know more about the condition than you do? And also, why are you seeing that person, right? Like, if they're not going to be able to give you some help. So I thought it would be useful to focus on that today. And I do think that coaches and advisors that have been trained by Tammy, I think, have an interesting and important role to play in smoothing out that experience and allowing patients to get much more benefit from each healthcare provider visit. So I think this is important enough, actually, that I devoted an entire chapter in my book, the Fibro Manual. Chapter 5 is helping your doctor help you. And, I wish I didn't have to write that chapter. I wish that healthcare providers and doctors knew a lot more about how to treat fibromyalgia, but the reality is they often don't. And so that's kind of one of the first friction points that we need to address. So as I talk today, I wanted to kind of talk about 3 friction points where I see the challenges, where I see it break down between what patients need and what healthcare providers can give them. And so the three friction points are first, the knowledge gap that Tammy identified and that all of you are very familiar with. The second is that we operate, at least in the US, in a very broken healthcare system. It is fragmented. It was struggling before the COVID pandemic, and the pandemic pretty much made everything worse, I will say, with maybe one exception that I'll talk about in kind of the healthcare world, how the healthcare provider and the whole healthcare system works. I think everything is worse, unfortunately, but the good news is if we can identify the problems, then we can find solutions. So knowledge gap, broken healthcare system. The final piece is fibromyalgia factors, what we bring to that interaction. And the biggest one that can cause problems is really fibro brain, fibro fog. That's one of them. There are a few others. So I wanted to kind of structure my talk around that, like these three friction points and how you as a patient can help overcome these friction points and help your doctor to help you. So the first thing is the knowledge gap. I will start with the good news. The good news is your healthcare provider, at least in this day and age, for the most part, understands and believes that fibromyalgia is real. And they do have some basic things that they can offer you. The 3 FDA-approved medications, often something like physical therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, those all have some benefit, maybe not the most benefit, but I think, if one of those gives you 5 or 10% improvement, great, we'll totally take it. So at least you're not having to deal with a provider that doesn't even believe in the condition that you're dealing with. So that's progress. Where the gap still exists is in healthcare providers' understanding of how to treat fibromyalgia beyond the basics. And that is basically the reason why I wrote the Fibro Manual, because I was thinking, gosh, I have all this knowledge about how to treat fibromyalgia that I learned the hard way, both on myself, finding things that help me, and then through treating thousands of fibromyalgia patients over the past decade plus. And I thought, okay, I'm only one person, can't clone myself. How can I help the most people with fibromyalgia to address this? So I thought, if we're going to have to be our own doctors to a certain extent, if we're going to have to bring that information to our doctor, we need to have that information in kind of the most scientifically valid, the most updated, the most easy to understand format. And so that is where I think having the Fibro Manual or something similar, doesn't have to be my book, but something where you can kind of gain that education. And then you can bring more knowledgeable information to your provider. And for the most part, now speaking as a healthcare provider, for the most part, healthcare providers are open to you bringing information to them as long as you do it in the correct way. So contrast these two things. The first is a patient coming in kind of angry and saying, I read online, I think I have SIBO. Why did you not diagnose me with SIBO, which is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth? That actually directly happened to me. And I'm a very open-minded provider. And I'm like, yes, let's look into it. But the way that it was brought to me, instantly I'm in a defensive mode because I'm being sort of like attacked. And healthcare providers are human, right? Like we don't like to feel in that defensive mode. Contrast that with a patient coming in, I'm wondering if I might have SIBO. I read about this and some of my symptoms seem like it. Are you familiar with that? Like that's a whole different ballgame because then the provider can say either, yes, I am, and let's look into it, or I'm not. I'll find out more about it, or let me refer you to somebody. So I would just kind of keep that in mind. And it's understandable, it's frustrating. I totally get it. You've been sitting in the doctor's office, the waiting room for an hour, you're aggravated, you were in traffic to get there, but trying to bring it to your provider with curiosity and with like a more collaborative approach, it really can help. If your provider responds to that in I'm not even going to talk about that with you, then it's time to get a new provider. That's what I would say. If they're not even open to exploring something that you've suggested, I think that it's time to move on. But if they are willing to work with you, I would say try, because it is hard to find good doctors these days. So if you find one that at least is compassionate and understanding and willing to work with you with a sense of curiosity, hold on to that person. That is a really good provider. So the next component is the broken healthcare system. And you all have been customers of the broken healthcare system. It's broken in many ways. partly because it's so fragmented. A doctor, you might have a primary care doctor that's over here in one healthcare system. Then you might be seeing a sleep specialist that is in a private practice over here. And then you might have a neurologist, and you might have a physical therapist, and all the different providers. They often are operating in silos, or at least can only see part of what the other person might be doing. And so it's very hard as a healthcare provider to feel like you're operating with only partial or incomplete knowledge. So how can we get around this fragmentation of our healthcare system? Well, this is where, as a patient, if you can kind of try to accumulate all your own information and bring it to each provider. So by this, I mean, if you get a sleep study, request a copy of that results to be sent to you, put it in a folder or a file, and then bring it with you when you go see your primary care doctor. And then if they are interested and they want to see it, you can share it with them. You don't have to, but basically you have to become sort of the repository of all your health information. The more you can do that, the less time your primary care provider or whoever is helping you with fibromyalgia has to spend chasing down those records, which, because of our broken healthcare system, can take like a week or 2 weeks or never, so it takes a lot of energy on the healthcare provider's part that could be much better spent reading an article about SIBO so they know how to help you with that. So I would say things that you can do to make your doctor's life easier as they operate in a broken healthcare system are really important. So trying to get all the records that you can, and the most important records are lab results, diagnostic imaging results, surgical results, anything that could help your healthcare provider to help you. This doesn't mean you need to bring in 800 pages and plop it on their lap and say, this is all my records for the past 20 years. Like, that's not going to make your healthcare provider's job any easier. What you're trying to do is have those records with you or accessible in such a way that you can provide them if your healthcare provider asks for them or needs them. So be your own healthcare record repository. The second thing, and the other way that our healthcare system is broken, is doctors do not have enough time with patients. This is across the board, no matter what specialty and no matter what you're dealing with. And it is incredibly frustrating for patients. It's also incredibly frustrating and discouraging for doctors. No doctor likes being rushed. No doctor likes having to, the reason why your doctors are like typing while they're talking to you is because they have to, because they have 8 more patients they have to see before lunch. And I made the decision when I left kind of the grind, when I kind of went out in my own private practice, I made the decision to, when I talk with a patient, to look at them directly, to not be typing on my computer. What that means, though, is I then later have to spend another half an hour to an hour of my time typing that note. So that's a decision I made. Most doctors in healthcare systems don't have that luxury. That's part of why I left the healthcare system as much as I could. So understanding that your doctor feels rushed, you feel rushed. So how can we improve that? A couple of ways. Most doctors have the ability to have extended appointments with you for more complex issues. A lot of patients don't know that. So when I was working as a primary care physician, I had a 20-minute patient visit option or a 40-minute visit option. And it was kind of at my discretion. Like if I knew a patient was complicated, or for anybody that was over the age of like 70, 75, based on all the healthcare conditions they might have, knowing they're going to have more medicines, I would say, okay, this person needs an extended visit every time. And what's interesting is I don't think any of my patients knew that that was an option. So what I told them is, hey, if you have fibromyalgia, every time you come in, see if you can get that extended visit time. And so it's really worth a conversation with your doctor saying, hey, I know fibromyalgia is a lot. It's complicated. It can take some time. Would it be possible for us to have extended visits each time so that we can cover more in each visit? And then it's up to their discretion. But I just kind of want you to know that that is usually an option doctors have. So ask for it. The other thing is the reality of a doctor's life. So when I was in primary care, I would see 16 patients a day. I would work through lunch. I barely had a chance to pee. Like it would be like 3 p.m. And I'm like, why am I so grumpy? Why does my stomach hurt? And I was like, oh my gosh, I haven't peed in like 8 hours because I just haven't had time because I've been running around. So know that your doctor is, we're working straight through that whole time. And then at the end of the day, that's when I sit down to finish my notes and to answer patient messages. And so a message that comes in, I'm not getting compensated for that time. That is something I'm doing after my day. So I might be looking at the message a patient is sending me on hour 12. I'm grumpy. I really want to get home. Or maybe I'm at home. I know a lot of doctors that actually every night after work, they come home and they chart. There's like a term for it, like it's home charting. Like you come home, you put the kids to bed, you chart for another few hours. So then when I'm getting that message, even if I am the nicest, most compassionate, most open-minded doctor, if I'm grumpy and it's hour 14, I'm not going to have the bandwidth to really give you anything more than a tert response. So I know from a patient perspective, it's so much more convenient to just send your doctor a message like, hey, I read about SIBO. What do you think? Could I have it? It is so much kinder for your doctor, and you will get so much more from your doctor if you make an appointment to talk about that. I think hopefully one way that things might change in the future is if there are more virtual visits, because that was actually one good thing that I thought might come out of the COVID pandemic, is that all of a sudden, all these healthcare providers, we were really reticent for whatever reason. We weren't really jumping into telemedicine. Well, the COVID pandemic pushed us all into it. And for the most part, I think both doctors and patients really liked it. They were satisfied with it, with a few exceptions. The challenge is it hasn't really stuck. And there's one reason for it. For the most part, insurance does not compensate for telemedicine. They only compensate, and this is ridiculous to me, that we're 2023 post-pandemic and we don't compensate. For the most part, a doctor's not going to get paid unless they see you in person in the office. So this is why telemedicine has not taken off like it should. Now, I'm hoping that people will realize the idiocy of that, and we will start seeing that there will be more acceptance because, oh my goodness, from a fibromyalgia perspective, telemedicine is so great, right? It takes, 2 spoons in that analogy of energy to have a telemedicine visit, whereas it takes 20 to get out of the house, fight traffic, find parking, see your doctor, wait around. You know what I mean? It's just so much simpler. And so if we can get it to the point where that's compensated for, beautiful. But in the meantime, if what your doctor expresses hey, I need to see you in person, that's probably the reason for it. So it's worth asking if telemedicine is available, but if it's not, please understand that that's probably why. Okay, so we've talked about the knowledge gap, how you can get around that. We've talked about unfortunately, our very broken healthcare system, different ways to get around that. So requesting longer extended visits, trying to use appointments for more complicated things. I think messages are fine for very simple, hey, am I supposed to take that medicine twice a day or once a day? That kind of thing, a yes or no, really quick, takes your doctor 30 seconds to answer it, totally fine, email. Anything longer than that, it really needs to be an appointment. And then understanding that you might need to be the central repository of your records so that you can provide your healthcare providers with that. Okay. Then the final piece is what we as fibromyalgia patients might bring to that encounter. And this is what I call the fibromyalgia factor. And the biggest thing is we're foggy. And it might be, if you get to the doctor's appointment and it's been already a lot of energy you've spent getting there, making that appointment, doing all the things, your likelihood of being in a more foggy, fibro-brained place where you're going to have a harder time remembering or kind of being able to even ask the questions you want to ask. I think the fibro factor, and really by that, it's the dyscognition, the brain issues, that is something that can play a big role and can leave us feeling pretty unsatisfied and maybe a little bit confused when we leave. And I think this is where trying to figure out really good ways of, coming into your doctor very prepared with, 2 or 3 top things you want to talk to them about on a piece of paper. I think asking them, hey, can I take notes while you're talking? And maybe asking them to slow down or repeat themselves, advocating for yourself in that way. Ideally, if you can bring somebody with you so that they can listen, maybe take notes so that you can just focus on that interaction with a doctor, all of that can really, really help. And the final piece of that is it can be hard. The one thing, even outside of the doctor's office, the one thing that I see fibro fog where that really interferes with our ability to get the help we need is it makes it so hard to remember back to how we felt last week, right? So a doctor will say okay, 2 months ago, I started you on this medicine. How have you felt since then? And often there's this it's very hard to accurately report that. And then It's not really going to give your doctor the data they need to decide, well, does that medicine work? Should we go up on dosage, et cetera? So finding a way to track your symptoms, whether it's on an app, whether it's on, a piece of paper, you can use some tracking scores and questionnaires that have been developed for research, like the Fibromyalgia Impact Questionnaire. That is a little bit of a longer scoring questionnaire. In my clinic, used a shorter version of that had only 7 questions. I called that the VASFIC, basically meaning like, hey, it really kind of looks at like pain, fibrofog, fatigue, the key 7 symptoms that I felt were important clinically. And that is available. If you'd like to use that, you can find that at drginevra.com, because I feel like some way to track your symptoms will help you to figure out if something's helping, and also will help you to give more information to your doctor. And just as I'm finishing up, I want you to know that it is not just people with fibromyalgia that struggle with this. So they have done lots of studies looking at like, why don't patients take their hypertension medications? And I was actually in a course recently, a CME course for physicians, and they were lamenting like, why do patients not adhere to their medications? Like, what is wrong with these patients? And studies have been done that have shown, this is not fibro patients, it's just across the board in a primary care clinic, immediately after leaving the doctor's office, 60% of patients cannot accurately report, they cannot accurately tell back what their doctor just told them about taking a medication. This isn't even like a complicated thing. This is like, how did your doctor tell you to take this blood pressure medicine? 60% of people cannot do that. Add on top of that, fibrofog. I mean, we're looking at like 80 to 90%. And then add on top of that it's not going to be a simple recommendation. To going back to my SIBO example, that's going to be like, hey, track your symptoms after this food, look into getting this test done, blah, 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 look on this website. It might be like a 4 or 5 point thing that you need to do. So what I, as a physician, did is I actually spent the time to write down a very detailed step-by-step instructions. Now, I had the luxury to do that because I was outside of the healthcare system. Your doctor might not have that. So you might need to say like, hey, whoa, can you write that down for me, or give me a second to write it down and then reflect back? So what I have here is I'm supposed to take this medicine twice daily, and then I need to do this, and then I need to do that. Is that correct? And then the doctor can say, yes, that is correct. I think then you might increase the odds if you leave then and you're still questioning, like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Then you can look at this and be like, aha. So that is kind of in a nutshell ways that I think that we as patients can help our providers. And I think as coaches and advisors, I think if you can share some of these tips and tricks with your coachees, advisees, if that's the right term, I think that they are going to be able to get a lot more from each healthcare provider visit. And that is so important, because unfortunately, we really can't do this on our own. We really do need healthcare provider input. But the challenge is, how do we find those healthcare providers that have the knowledge and the ability to help us? Well, this is where we have to help them to help us. So I hope that this talk has helped you a little bit to understand more about how you can find ways to help your doctor help you. Congratulations to all the graduates. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. And I know everybody's thinking, they wish they could have you as a doctor.
I wish I could be that doctor for everybody.
You and me both, right? Thank you again so much for sharing that. And those are so valuable, such valuable tips, because really, as patients, we have to take control of some aspects of our healthcare to get what we need. So these are fabulous tips you guys can all implement. Thank you so much. All right, graduates. And that wraps up Dr. Ginevra's commencement speech at our July 2023 Fibromyalgia Stories of Hope and Healing graduation event. As I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, I've got some free resources for you to help you implement the tips Dr. Ginevra has shared. First, I've created several forms and worksheets for you to use with your doctor. There's a symptom tracking log where you can write down your pain and fatigue every day, as Dr. Ginevra suggested. There are also forms to track all the medications and supplements that you take or have tried, as well as all the providers you see. Because let's be real, it takes a village to keep a fibro body happy. Am I right? There's also a form where you can track all of your different diagnoses, how well controlled they are, and which providers are treating that particular diagnosis. You can get a link to download all those resources on today's show notes page at fibromyalgiapodcast.com/113. As Dr. Ginevra shared, working with a coach can be helpful in helping you prepare for your doctor visits, as well as getting you better results and better compliance in the instructions that you are given. In fact, there have been studies on this. And to quote Dr. Thomas Bodenheimer, he said, "The more telephone calls between a health coach and a patient, the better the patient's blood pressure. It's almost like a medicine. If you increase the dose of coaching, you get a better result." Now, he was talking specifically about the results of coaching in a study about blood pressure, but the same applies to fibromyalgia. The more you work with a coach, the better your results will be, and that is what the studies have actually shown us. We can help you prepare for your doctor visits and implement those things that your doctor has asked you to do. If you'd like to schedule a consultation to see if working with a coach would be a good fit for you, just go to findafibrocoach.com. We'll have that link on today's show notes page as well. Also, our next Certified Fibromyalgia Advisor training program begins soon. If you would like to become a more educated patient and improve your fibromyalgia symptoms, consider joining us. You'll find a link to all the details on today's show notes page at fibromyalgiapodcast.com/113. Or you can also check out the Be a Coach special podcast series that is running right now between our regular episodes. In our next episode, 114, I will be sharing our graduate interviews. These graduates have improved their fibromyalgia, on average, 55% in just 3 months. So think about that, cutting your symptoms in half in just 3 months. One of our graduates improved by 87%, and our 2 coach graduates are now nearly symptom-free. Check out our next episode, episode 114, to hear how they accomplished this, what it was like working with their coach, and some of the things that they have done to feel better. Several of our graduates get pretty specific, so I'm sure it'll give you some new ideas. See you back here next time. We'll have all 7 of our graduate interviews for episode 114. And that wraps up another episode of the Fibromyalgia Podcast. I'm your coach, Tammy Stackelhouse. For daily doses of hope, inspiration, and practical advice, come hang out with me on Facebook. Visit facebook.com/fibrocoach to find my personal coaching page and connect with me directly. To find the show notes, additional resources, or to schedule a consultation with me or one of my coaches, visit fibromyalgiapodcast.com.